All right, well, I think we're at the top of the hour here. Thanks everyone for joining and welcome to our webinar today, EV charging for your business or commercial property. Really appreciate the great interest in this topic and the willingness of several great panelists to join us today and be part of us to help us understand several aspects around really related to EV charging itself. So let me just do some quick introductions of who we'll be hearing from today. We've got Nigel Zeed, who many of you, if you've been involved in all in the local EV market in Boulder County, it's a familiar name to you. Nigel is an EV educator, background many years at Boulder Nissan, and now he's off on his own with EV transformation. Nigel's going to talk to us about just general trends and projections around the electric vehicle market, kind of set us up for where we're headed with supporting that through charging. RJ Harrington is an EV charging expert, works with National Car Charging, a company that provides charging equipment support. He's going to talk to us about equipment and installation basics. And then we're going to hear from Matt Mines, program manager from the Colorado Energy Office, who's going to tell us a little bit about the Charge Ahead Colorado grant program, which is open now for a few weeks, and then hopefully we'll be offering more grant opportunities in 2022. And then finally, Xcel Energy has come out with some really neat, new, powerful programs to support businesses with EV charging. And so Brandon Bickneys is the product and portfolio manager at Xcel Energy, and will talk to us about the Xcel programs. We'll welcome your questions in the Q&A and try to corral those questions and save them till we've gotten through the four panelists, and then certainly encourage everyone to stick around for question and answer period where we'll work through those. If we hit the top of the hour and folks are available to stay on, we can go a little bit over if necessary. If we can't get to everybody's questions on the call today, then we'll certainly get answers to those and get those back out to you. Just a quick introduction of me. My name is Tom Hardy. I'm with Partners for a Clean Environment. We go by PACE. PACE is a program of the Boulder County Office of Sustainability, Climate Action, and Resilience. Another acronym used for that group is OSCAR. So PACE is part of OSCAR. For over 20 years, we've been providing a one-stop shop solution for business sustainability in Boulder County. Just a quick overview of what PACE does to support businesses. We work in four program areas, four focus areas: energy efficiency, waste reduction, water efficiency, and transportation. And we're really focused this year and beyond on helping businesses understand their greenhouse gas emissions, looking for opportunities for efficiency and electrification through equipment upgrades and best practices. We help businesses with goal setting and reporting, with the project implementation itself when it comes to efficiency and renewables and electrification. We support businesses with financial incentives. We have our own rebate and grant funds, and we know really what's out there through the utilities and other programs that may be available. And so we pride ourselves on being able to help businesses build the financing, build the business model to do the right thing for their business. And finally, we really help with staff and stakeholder engagement through trainings and marketing support and so forth. So again, a one-stop shop for business sustainability in Boulder County, and glad to be presenting this information to you today. So with that, I'm going to jump over to our first panelist, Nigel. Why don't you take it away?
Well, hi, good morning, everyone. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to be to this event. Really pleased about that. I don't have any slides to show you. I'm just going to be a little talk and ask me questions as you wish. Ask me questions afterwards. Contact me anytime. My company is actually called EV Transformation. This is one of the issues I have with it is people who write transformation, so I'll have to work on that. It's all about businesses. We're right now, everyone is selling a lot of cars, but they're all five-seater cars. They're all five-seater sedans, and there's very, very little in the choice of vehicles right now for businesses, small delivery vans, small pickup trucks, passenger vans, minivans, all of the things that a lot of us really need. I do have a customer, Molly's Spirits, they're in Denver and Longmont now, and he has 28 Nissan Leafs, and he drops the back seats down and he uses all of those for all of his deliveries. So it's just a massive saving. He's actually being tracked, I think, right now by Sarwatch Group to see usage and such. But his servicing bills have gone down. His obviously no gasoline at all. He has a quick charger there, and he has a bank of level 2s, which is more than enough. Most of his cars, you could just park them on the level 2s overnight. They're putting 20 to 25 miles an hour back into the car, so they're pretty much all full in the morning. But his maintenance is nothing. It's tire rotations, it's battery inspections. There is nothing else to do to them. Although we are lacking, like I say, lacking the choice of the type of vehicle that we could be using. But there are still lots of parts within fleets that can use, and I'm not just talking about Leafs, because I'm a very agnostic EV guy, because I love them all. It's just whatever works for you. Whether you buy them or whether you lease them, you know, and how far your cars are going in a day. We always have these things. People say, well, I say, how far are you going in a day? And they say, well, about 3 hours. Well, in LA, that's about 2 miles. But so it's not the time you're driving. It is, you know, how far are you going? If you were to look at a map of where you are and draw a circle around it, there was a 100-mile diameter from where you are you going outside of that area? Because you have cars now that have 200, 250 miles of range. The batteries don't have memories, so you don't have to drain them down to nothing before you chop them back off again. And so you're never really going to run out. There is a lot of charging stations, but there does need to be more. And I just did a trip from Boulder, Colorado to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and back in a Nissan Leaf, a 2019 Nissan Leaf. So it's got a battery which is a 62 kilowatt battery, in theory a range of about 216 miles. Realistically, I got about 180 on each of them, but infrastructure was tough. It was interesting. So there is no such thing, in my opinion, as range anxiety anymore. That's a word we've been using for a long time. It is very much range serenity now. I'm super chilled with the range of the cars. It's more a charging anxiety. Where are the chargers going to be working? And this was an interesting part of my trip. Is well, Walmart is everywhere with Electrify America charging stations. The downside of Nissan, and they're going to be changing it, is that they're the only ones that have a CHAdeMO charger, so or use a CHAdeMO charger. So you go to Electrify America, there's 7 CCS, there's 1 CHAdeMO, and of course, what's not working? The CHAdeMO. I have been able to check what was working and what wasn't, but it's a bit of a gamble. So I actually charged earlier and earlier on each of them. But it was interesting. I met an awful lot of very interesting people. Incredible how many people in trucks pickups would stop and have a long chat about electric. So when the Lightning comes out, the Ford Lightning, that's going to be a game changer, because that's the vehicle that everyone trusts. Ford, it's just a name you would trust. But charging was interesting. You know, I would go and I'd spend half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour charging in one place and then go on to the next. But I made it all the way across. And the Leaf is very old technology in a battery sense. It's very old fashioned. So there's no cooling system to it, no heating system to it. But I made it just fine. But if you're going to be putting in charging stations, a couple of the suggestions are, don't stick it around the back of the building. To be honest, some of these places were super dodgy where they put the chargers. They really didn't think about it. And what I did notice was with the networks, some were better than others at checking on their chargers. So like, for instance, Electrify America, they've got a ton of them. And I love the fact that they're out there, although, I mean, they had to do it because they were sort of forced to do it. They've got all these charging stations, but they're not monitoring them 24/7. So the only time that they know that they are not working is when someone complains and says, oh, it's not working. And I met the guy that actually does repairs, and he covers 3 states. How on earth are you going to do that? So my suggestion when I was traveling around, when I talk to utilities, is the utilities need to go to the networks and say, look, we are right in your area. We're electricians. We know high voltage electricity. Give us a contract and we'll fix your charging stations, because we cannot afford to have great cars and a network, but a network that doesn't work. So that was a big takeaway for me, is how well these chargers were or weren't working, and where they were located and what they cost. That was really interesting. The difference in price was massive. Place I went to in Nebraska, 16 cents. Go to other places, 43 cents. One place I went to, a couple of places I went to, where it was only $4.20 for electricity, but they charged me for standing while I was charging. So it was $11 in standing fees just to be plugged into the charger and charging, which was like, really? We need to have something that makes it easy for everyone. Ride and drives for you guys, if you need us to bring vehicles down so you can see how they work. If you need us to talk about, charging, what do you need at work? Are your staff taking any of the vehicles at home in the evenings? Do you want them to be able to charge at home? What can we do about helping them with charging it at home on, say, a 240? There's so many things to be done, but it is such an efficient way of delivering things. And it's, by the way, when we talk about EVs, we automatically think of cars, but EVs is a lot of things. Scooters, skateboards, bicycles. Electric bicycles are what are little tuk-tuks. You know what tuk-tuks are? Those little three-wheeler things. Brilliant. Small businesses, you don't need an F350 turbo diesel to deliver one parcel. It would probably be better if you had a bicycle. Better for parking, better for charging, better for the environment, everything. So where we focus on just on cars, we should be looking at bikes as well. And that also saves on our charging infrastructure as well. I'm not sure what else you want me to say, or even whether I said what you wanted me to say, but yeah.
Thank you, Nigel. That's a kind of great intro into the program here. Takeaway is, the EV transformation, transformation in your case. Apologies for the miss there. Is underway. The demand is growing, and let's go ahead, RJ, and go to you. I'm gonna share your slides here. Just give me a second to get them up and presented. Why don't you take it away?
Great, Tom, thanks. And to build on what Nigel has been saying, although Nigel, you'll see a couple of terminologies here that will chafe you a bit. The ICE age is over. And in this instance, ICE stands for internal combustion engine. And so we'll build on a little bit of what Nigel said and then talk more about the actual charging infrastructure details. So we are in a race to electrify transportation, and in our bias opinion, since I've been driving electric since 2013, and many of our colleagues, is there is a lot of change happening right now in the transportation industry. And now it includes broadly electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So Tom, the next slide, please. And Nigel touched on this: bicycles, motorcycles, school buses, long haul trucks, taxis, Uber, Lyft. A lot of different vehicle electrification platforms are rolling out, and to the tune of, next slide, please, sir. Every 15 seconds last year, an EV was sold, and that includes from light duty to medium duty to heavy duty vehicle classes across all classes. Now, Nigel touched on this as well, much in the form of light duty, but that to a significant degree is based on the fact that heavy duty buses, etc., that kind of transportation is significantly more expensive on the CapEx side, the upfront cost. But then Nigel also touched on the operation and maintenance, and ultimately over the course of ownership, these vehicles are less expensive to operate. Tom? So they are cheaper to fuel and maintain. There are zero out of the tailpipe emissions. There are no tailpipes. And the more that the grid gets cleaned by the addition of on-site solar and wind, the lower emissions will be. It's more of a point source pollution game, whereby we can keep fewer sources at the point of tailpipe on the road and clean up the larger points that are connected to the grid. A lot of fun to drive. Most advanced technologies are being deployed into BEVs and or plug-in hybrids, but it's really nice and quiet. You get a good feel for the road. The technology is extensive. And then even more importantly, we do a lot more for our own security with reduction on fracking, foreign oil dependencies, greater national security, and just helps with a variety of different air cleaning benefits. Tom, next slide. So Nigel, I told you chafe, range anxiety. Yes, there is still range anxiety. It does exist, but folks mostly have that because they don't understand that charging infrastructure is getting better predominantly. And the battery pack sizes are getting more efficient. The same battery pack size in our Nissan Leaf in 2013 was 24 kilowatt hours. Now it's closer to 62. So the extended range of all of these vehicles is growing. The capital costs I touched on already. Multi-unit residential is certainly still a challenge, although we are cracking it in a variety of different applications. New build, new construction is of course easiest, but even retrofits can be done and more can be done at a lower price point. A lot of misinformation out there that is leading to fear of change, but ultimately what we are experiencing is as soon as people get their fanny in a seat of an electric vehicle, even for a ride and drive that Nigel touched on, and then especially into the first stages of ownership, there's really no going back to an internal combustion engine vehicle. So that information becomes real. And we'll touch a little bit more on infrastructure and how we are engaged in the deployment of additional infrastructure and how there are incentives across the board to help alleviate that CapEx. Colorado is a zero emission vehicle state, a ZEV state. And so predominantly what that means is that different original equipment manufacturers, OEMs of the cars themselves, will be bringing all or most of their EV models into Colorado as they begin to deploy them. They'll probably go to California first, but eventually Colorado will see all of these different EV models. Tom, next slide. Touched on the battery pack size, and these are estimates of how the range will grow year over year. Nigel touched on a 200+ mile range average today, and that is just growing by leaps and bounds as the existing technology becomes more efficient, more energy dense, and as new technologies become deployed here over the coming years. We will see really long range. But Nigel touched on this earlier as well. The average daily commute is around 30, maybe 40 miles. And if you've got a business vehicle, you certainly will know what the range that vehicle goes in on an average basis already. You should be tracking that. So your fleets can become electrified and do as much of the heavy lifting as they did in the past, even if you just have to fold down the back seat of a Leaf, as Molly Spirits does. But again, we touched on the fact that long haul trucking is becoming electrified and medium duty box truck electrification is happening rapidly as well. So 30-mile range is going to be predominantly covered on average, but then the battery pack size, as it continues to grow and become more efficient, will extend that range even further. Tom, next. So I touch on this slide predominantly because Nigel already said that he experienced different charging platforms. And so software commands a lot of it. PlugShare, more of a user input database. They suck data from alt fuels as well. ChargePoint does that. Tesla, most folks, of course, have heard of that brand. Their business model is only slightly differentiated because when they started back the middle part of the first decade in this century, there really was no infrastructure. So their business model became, we're going to build it and deploy it ourselves for our own vehicles. And Nigel also said some of the other manufacturers, all the other manufacturers have yet to catch up with that business model. And so these various software applications are being deployed to ultimately consolidate over the long term and make it easy for drivers to plug in across different pieces of charging infrastructure. Go ahead again, Tom. So multifamily housing is a significant impact. We started on or touched on this just a few slides ago, but ultimately, predominance of charging is still done at home and or fleets. But with this instance, multifamily housing is somebody's home and they are going to want to be able to charge there. Just so happens that over the nighttime sleeping hours is really beneficial time to add these new loads to existing grid infrastructure. The demand is less. Brandon may touch on this a little bit in his slide deck, or he may not, but ultimately there are these key factors to actually facilitating anybody charging at home. My family lives in a single family residence. We have a charger in our garage. It's pretty easy for us. But in a multifamily application, you're either going to be deploying a community charger. So that's one charger and all the vehicles are sharing it or others, or you've got dedicated EV charging because 80% of that charging is happening at home. And we are seeing surveys and finding real world experiences that if there's a renter at a multifamily housing complex, they're willing to pay more to have a dedicated charging space. Go ahead, Tom. So what we've been experiencing as well, and I don't own a vast fleet of buildings myself, but doing business across various portfolios, folks are more loyal. If they can charge at home, then they are staying in that particular location. If you don't have EV charging, then folks that drive EVs aren't going to rent from your particular facility. And there are revenue opportunities. It still is not a pure profit play, but you can grow revenue year over year. In fact, the actual revenue capabilities are something that is being required more and more and more. And there are revenue grade meters built into most of the charging hardware, and then the software helps to control that possibility. Tom, you could advance, please. So those community charging opportunities don't have to necessarily be limited to your multifamily residence. In fact, if I were to visit a friend living in a multifamily community or visiting a workplace that had charging, then it opens it up to me. And I, as a visitor, can in fact charge on that station. And there are waitlisting capabilities on these various pieces of software. There are reservation capabilities, ultimately opening up more and more of these community pieces of infrastructure. Doesn't really solve what Nigel touched on previously, going to Sioux Falls and that long distance charging, but it really helps out in the community. We're really focusing through the PACE window here on Boulder County. And so some of the other things that we try to touch on at National Car Charging is we want to make sure that there is much of this integration as possible. Obviously, there's going to have to be dedicated multifamily housing charging. You can't sacrifice a charger in the short run to me as a guest, but it opens this up. It opens it up at a workplace. Never really going to open it up in a fleet opportunity. That's going to be more behind the fence charging, but we want to try to deploy as much as possible that is open to as many EV drivers as possible. Go ahead, Tom. So what do we do next? Well, we're going to touch on the various incentive opportunities with the next two presenters, but fundamentally from a how do I get the electric vehicle charging infrastructure deployed at my property? Go ahead, Tom. What we want to do is we want to look at who may or may not be driving EVs, Do we want to encourage EV adoption on our particular property? Are those some of the reasons why we want to integrate this kinds of infrastructure? What do we need today? And there are building codes that are being deployed now and have been over time that actually have some requirements and some suggestions of what the difference is between an EV capable parking spot versus an EV ready parking spot versus an EV installed parking spot. For all of that, you really have to understand what kind of service do you have in your building. Is it going to be possible to tap into an existing service panel? Each one of these plugs, aka ports, at the low end require a dual pole 40 amp breaker to provide 30 amp output service to a vehicle. So you got to make sure you have enough of that. And then from a reporting and control requirement, Matt Mines will touch on that next. These are some of the auspices that are required as part of the granting infrastructure that's being deployed. If you're going to get incentive dollars, there has to be ability to report and prove that those dollars were spent wisely and the charging infrastructure is getting utilized. Finally, most of this gear is coming with parts only warranty. Some of the manufacturers offer both parts and labor for an extended price point. And then Nigel touched on it earlier. There are various programs that are opening up across the country. And here in Boulder County, many of the electrical contractors are now saying, well, we will install this infrastructure and then we'll match the parts warranty with our own labor warranty. Not that they're going to provide $0 coverage over time, but much low cost to make sure that their work is warranted. And then if there's a problem with the station itself and a part needs to be swapped or what have you, they can come back and fulfill that work. So really it comes down to a proper site assessment, making certain that whomever you decide to work with, be it National Car Charging or one of our other colleagues, that you get into the weeds, frankly, not only doing due diligence with what you're looking for, what you might apply for an incentive program, but really what it's going to mean over the long term and how it will impact your property and add value ultimately to your property. Go ahead, Tom. So we're going to hand the baton next to Matt Mines with the Colorado Energy Office and what Charge Ahead Colorado is able to do, because there are grants and incentives available. A lot of the dollars come from Volkswagen cheating on their diesel emissions, but there are other sources of funds that are ultimately getting, I will say, funneled into the Charge Ahead Colorado program. And this next tranche of funding is open already. Go ahead, Matt.
Cool. Thanks, RJ.
Whoops.
Thanks,
I
everybody.
passed that a little too quickly. I meant to say, go ahead, Tom, but yes, there you go. Next slide deck, Matt.
Yeah, try to stall.
Oh, while that presentation happens. Very cool. Off you go.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, hopefully I don't think I have any secret notes on there for folks to read. But yeah, appreciate it, RJ, on some of that background. Again, my name is Matt Mines with the Colorado Energy Office, presenting on our program, Charge Ahead Colorado. This program is a partnership program between us and the Regional Air Quality Council. And so likely if you're a Boulder County business or, multifamily, et cetera, likely you would fall under our partner agency, the Regional Air Quality Council's purview. And so it is a partnership program operated by the Energy Office and the RAC, with the RAC kind of covering the 7-county Denver metro area, and then the Energy Office covering the rest of the state. And so, if you're Boulder based, you would fall under the RAC's purview, but it's the same incentive, it's the same application, similar process. Kind of just gets parsed out on the back end depending on where you're located. Next slide, Tom, please.
All right. We're getting caught up here. There we go.
Yep, all good. Appreciate it. Just as I guess a little background, and I know Nigel and RJ talked a little bit about this, but part of why we do what we do and why this program is offered is the emissions associated with the transportation sector are now the highest contributor of emissions, CO2 emissions for Colorado, and they're also significant contributors to other pollutants, ozone forming pollutants, and so it's a significant air quality impact resulting from the transportation sector. And so just wanted to kind of highlight that and also highlight the emissions associated with an electric vehicle versus a combustion engine. The cool thing about an EV is it's the only vehicle that's going to get cleaner over time. And so your 2016 EV in 2025 is going to be cleaner than when you bought it. And that's of course the result of the grid becoming cleaner. But a tremendous benefit, whereas your typical combustion, generally deteriorates a bit over time. And so, yeah, significant air quality and emissions benefits associated with the transition to EVs. Next slide, please, Tom. And so we do have, I guess at this, for Colorado, there is an EV plan. It's updated every 2 years with, kind of sub goals for the various state agencies working on transportation electrification and strategies to reach those goals. But our overarching goal is 940,000 electric vehicles in Colorado by 2030, and an ambitious goal and inclusive of light duty, medium and heavy duty vehicles. We do offer some monitoring tools. We have a web page, a dashboard called Evaluate Colorado, where you can monitor and kind of see the additional registrations for light duty vehicles, and then also the charging stations and infrastructure being installed. So I encourage folks to check that out. But we are aiming for 940,000 electric vehicles in the state. Next slide, please, Tom. And so part of that and part of the goals of Charge Ahead Colorado are to meet the infrastructure needs. I would say we've made significant progress on infrastructure in the state. Charge Ahead Colorado has been operating for a number of years and has installed or has at this point awarded funding for over 1,500 stations. But there is tremendous need to support the 940,000 electric vehicles, and so there's gaps remaining, of course. And so we did a study. The ICCT did a study on Colorado, kind of on our behalf, looking at the current infrastructure and the needed infrastructure for transportation electrification, and I identified the gaps kind of demonstrated on this map here. So just one more thing to look into. If you're interested in getting a little nerdier about it, but a very interesting study. Please, next slide, Tom. And so, yeah, Charge Ahead Colorado, as I said, has been around for 7 or 8 years at this point. Has funded over 1,500 charging stations. With sort of that geographic distribution between the RAC and the energy office. The infrastructure is constantly developing and continuously improving. These maps aren't totally updated. I think if you saw it, even from the last update, there's dramatic improvements. But there is significant infrastructure being developed, at a statewide level, with needs still out there, which of course is why the programs are ongoing. Next slide, please, Tom. And so, yeah, as I mentioned, kind of in the intro, this is a partnership program between the Energy Office and the RAC. Again, if you're in the 7-county Denver metro area, including Boulder County, you would be under the RAC's purview. Fortunately, at the RAC, they also have a Matt running the program, and so you don't even have to learn a new name. They have Matt Goebel over there, who would be your point of contact. But again, same process, same application, same incentives, and it is a program for level 2 and DC fast charging stations with tiered incentives. And so, of course, we're looking for the appropriate infrastructure, the appropriate technology to be installed at the location being proposed. And so that could mean level 2s or DC fast chargers or a combination thereof. But we do offer 3 application rounds per year, one being open now through the 18th of October, and then we'll have 3 more in 2022, the next being in January. And so if this timeline is too tight to get your ducks in a row to apply, I certainly would encourage you to reach out to us with any questions, or the Recharge Colorado coaches, and use that resource and apply in a subsequent round. But when the program started, there were only about 50 charging stations in the state, and as I mentioned a couple of times now, there's over 1,500 grants or grants for more than 1,500 stations currently out there. Next slide, please, Tom. And so to the tiered incentives that are available, it kind of is based on technology being installed and the location. And so if you're operating a fleet, if you're a local government or a liquor store, to Nigel's point, running a fleet, there's a fleet only incentive given the lower kind of installation costs and equipment costs typically seen for that circumstance. And then for a publicly available level 2, these are all 80% up to $6,000, $9,000. On the DC fast charging front, it's 80% up to $35,000 or $50,000, depending on the power output of the charging stations. And I apologize, I didn't update this slide, obviously, but the RAC is no longer offering funding for vehicles. So as I read this, I realize that oversight. I copied and pasted, I'm not gonna lie. But the incentives for the charging infrastructure is accurate and current. And so if you have a 50 kW to 100 kW station, it would be eligible for 80% up to $35,000. And then above 100 kW station would be eligible for the higher $50,000 incentive. Next slide, please. And then, just highlighting some recently completed stations around the state. It's rapidly developing, in small and large communities. Of course, people are investing, in smaller communities to attract tourism and, visitors and create that economic development opportunity, and, enable that statewide travel. We do have kind of a sub goal or sub initiative within the state to electrify all of our scenic byways, really just enabling, statewide travel everywhere. And so, I appreciate, everybody on the call, and be interested in any questions. I think that's my last slide. Go ahead. I don't know if we're doing questions now or questions for later, I think was the strategy.
Matt, thank you. We're going to keep moving through on to Brandon next shortly here. We will take questions at the end. So I see some coming through in the chat, and Norma on my team is kind of getting those organized so we can get to those as soon as we get through. I just want to mention that before I joined the PACE team, I was a grant recipient of the Charge Ahead Colorado at a property that I own out in Lafayette, and was successfully awarded a grant to do a level 2 charger for our workspace, and it's just been a fantastic benefit to us. So one of the things that PACE can do is support people with support businesses with their applications. We don't do the grant writing for you, but we'll certainly review applications and coach you a little bit along the way about the kinds of things that are going to be likely to be most successful. So please reach out to PACE if you are thinking about applying for the Charge Ahead call-out grants. So with that, I'm going to jump one more time, see if I can get this done right here. Brandon, I got to find your presentation here. Give me a second.
No problem. Thank you.
While I'm doing that, Brandon, if you'd like to jump in.
Sure. Well,
I'm not seeing it here, but go ahead and I'll get this up as soon as I can.
I have it up too if you'd prefer that I share my screen, but
Yeah, go ahead. I'll be able to do that there. Why don't you go ahead?
all right. Bear with me.
Before Brandon shares his slides, in case anybody's wondering his background there, he's a space musician.
I've got him up here, Brandon. So
Oh, you do? Hey, all right. You beat me. That's right. Space musician. That's been on drums back there. Let's see.
Okay, go ahead, Brandon. We've got you up here.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. And, those last 3 presentations are going to be kind of hard to beat. There was a lot of good information in there, but I think it all ties together with what's in these new Excel programs. So I'll be talking about Excel, the ways Excel can help with commercial and multifamily EV charging and beyond. So starting out, kind of defining the vision that we have at Excel Energy for our territory is 1.5 million EVs adopted by 2030, which aligns with some pretty steep and ambitious goals to eliminate our carbon emissions. $1 billion in customer fuel savings annually by 2030. This kind of speaks to what Matt was talking about. There's not a lot of vehicles you can buy where that they're getting cleaner to operate every year. Well, there's also not a lot of vehicles you can buy where they're getting cheaper to operate every year. So that speaks to this $1 or less per gallon. That number gets driven down the more that Excel is able to become the fuel provider for these vehicles. And the more that we're providing the fuel for vehicles, the more renewables we're able to bring on to support this bold 2030 vision. We also hope to be eliminating 5 million tons of carbon emissions annually by 2030 with cleaner energy. So how do we do that? How can we help? Through educational and advisory services, including some of our EV advisors. You see commercial and industrial, as well as multifamily, are supported by people on the Excel EV team that you can actually call, get a hold of any time to answer questions about how we can help. We also have our community planning by way of Partners in Energy that helps to, among other really valuable services, come up with an electrification plan for communities, meaning EV adoption plan. Fleet customer assessments, we'll cover that in a second, but we have a fleet electrification advisory program that helps there. We also have a part to play in make-ready infrastructure, and as well as charging equipment. Make-ready infrastructure, and we'll cover that a little more in a second, helps to overcome that initial cost. I think RJ mentioned this, that high initial cost of getting charging installed, we can help to offset that. Charging equipment, meaning Excel will provide charging equipment, but many of our programs also have the option for you to bring your own so that you can have a better fit. Also smart charging options, offering optimization programs that help to take advantage of the next category, which would be time varying rates, helping to promote charging off peak times when we're not, when it's least impactful to the grid and when there's more renewable energy available. That means, charging in the late afternoon, at night, a lot of times to support responsible use of electricity. And then we also offer rebates. Those come in the way of residential programs offering income qualified vehicle rebates for purchasing new vehicles, charging rebates for income qualified and high emissions customers, as well as a multifamily rebate that we'll cover in a second. So if you want to switch to the next slide. So let's start out with the fleet portfolio. This is kind of our roadmap to helping fleets electrify. There's a lot here, and understanding that there's a couple acronyms on here that we're about to get to. We start with advisory planning and assessments. I think we have a lot of fleet operators come in that maybe could benefit from a little advisory help in figuring out where charging should be, how vehicles can be replaced, what's the least impact to their operations that we can provide by also showing them the cost savings associated with electrifying a fleet. Once that's done, and that's in the way of, we call it FEEP. If you remember that acronym for a second, we'll come back to it. Also offering school bus rebates and income qualified and high emissions rebates for charging equipment. Moving from that kind of initial stage of figuring out, what do we need and where, how do we replace vehicles? We move into the charging infrastructure by way of EV supply infrastructure, which we'll cover in a second. And then once we have charging built and vehicles charging, we can help to optimize to keep the electric bill as low as possible, taking advantage of time varying rates, helping to manage, what vehicles are charging where, and again, having the lowest impact on fleet operations possible with the most benefit. So you saw the acronym FEEP. That's the Fleet Electrification Advisory Program. Someone before had mentioned SawWatch Labs, I think. We're working with SawWatch Labs to collect telematics data from vehicles, existing fleets, and turning that data into a vehicle suitability tool, which helps to recommend replacements for vehicles, as well as, kind of tracking where these vehicles are in a day. How much downtime do they have? How many chargers are really necessary? How long does a vehicle stay in one spot? What level of charging is necessary? Because we can try to keep electric bills low that way and minimize the amount of impact that an installation for charging actually has on a site. Also, this FEEP program has the ability to analyze cost savings, fuel savings, maintenance savings, and really help to justify, electrification of a fleet if appropriate. We also saw EVSI as an acronym, it's EV supply infrastructure. This is one of my personal favorites. You see, we split installation of new charging equipment from the utility side into three pieces. The first would be the line extension portion, and the line extension is everything that the utility normally provides, right? Poles and wires, transformers, the green box outside, right? That'd pretty much be business as usual, but where we can come in to help is installing a completely dedicated service called EV supply infrastructure. And that's all of the wire and conduit and a standalone meter and a panel and everything it takes to get from the grid to the charging equipment. So this means you're not tapping into existing electrical capacity in a building. You're not having to worry about, geographic remoteness. As long as we can get electricity out there, we can provide this EV supply infrastructure to make sure that you're able to charge without having to worry about capacity. And I think the biggest advantage here is that EV supply infrastructure is paid for by the utility. So we would install it at no cost and then own it and operate and maintain it just like we would anything that's on that line extension portion, just like anything that we have in the field currently, right? Moving on to the multifamily housing portfolio, and RJ did a really great job of illustrating the need here, and I have a lot, I think, that ties directly to that. He mentioned 80% of charging done at home, right? Multifamily housing is where a lot of folks live, and there's a lot of barriers to overcome with getting charging in multifamilies. So if you recall, the EV supply infrastructure model that we just walked through, there's two ways that can help a multifamily. The first is in a shared parking situation. Shared parking meaning residents and guests can go to a parking spot and use shared charging equipment. Maybe there's a point of sale on the charging equipment that allows them to, pay via credit card, RFID, an app, and everybody shares some parking spots as well as charging equipment. Understanding that's not a great fit for a lot of multifamilies, we'll also offer an assigned parking model. The really cool thing here is, in addition to providing EV supply infrastructure, we can also provide Excel charging equipment for a monthly fee, and the metering is done through that charging equipment. So what that means is, instead of, the the HOA or the property manager, the landlord having to split out a bill among a bunch of people sharing some chargers, we can actually bill directly to a renter or a condo owner directly to their Excel bill via metering done on the charging equipment. So it takes some of the complication out of that billing arrangement. This also helps, I think, overcome the problems with installation in deeded parking spots. I think we've talked with a lot of condo owners who are interested in housing EV charging, but don't know how to move forward. This seems to be a really good fit for that world. In addition to the EV supply infrastructure models of shared and assigned parking, we also offer a new construction rebate. And going back to another topic that RJ touched on, some building code, as you know, being in Boulder, some building codes require EV ready, EV capable spots. So we wanted to incentivize going above and beyond that code requirement with $2,000 per port by way of a rebate. And that helps to fund any status of EV installation from EV capable, EV ready to total install. We want to start working with multifamily developers early on in the design cycle, so we know that we're making an incremental difference in the amount of charging that's being installed. But EV supply infrastructure is really meant for retrofit and this new construction rebate is where we can come in for brand new buildings and kind of start fresh, right? The last offering on the multifamily housing side is an income qualified rebate of $2,200 per port to help pay for charging equipment. That's available for the shared and assigned parking models. We can work with customers to determine if they're in a higher emissions impacted community or if they're income qualified. Both would be eligible for the rebate. So if you go on our website, which is, you don't mind going back to that slide one more time, I'm sorry. If you go to our website down there at excelenergy.com/commercial EVs, you can find a map of where those higher emissions communities that have been identified are. But there's also an application if you don't see yourself on that map and you think that this is really pertains, you can apply to be an additional higher emissions community. And this applies across portfolios. You'll see this in multifamily housing as well as fleet, community charging hubs as well. And then one last thing here, the place to start for any commercial customer looking to take advantage of one of these rebates or one of these programs would be to go to excelenergy.com/commercial EVs. And there's a button right at the top that says work with an advisor. And our EV advisors are dedicated professionals in these programs that can help walk you through to kind of define what's happening, what the right fit might be, and hope to figure out kind of where you're at in the electrification process. So I think the hope is that we're understanding that there's a lot here and it's kind of a lot to take in. We have someone to guide you through that. Now we can move on. I'm sorry. Thank you. So lastly, our public charging portfolio. This looks like several segments that we're trying to reach, including public charging and community charging hubs. We offer EV supply infrastructure, an EV supply infrastructure program to pay for all of the equipment that it takes to connect your charging equipment to the grid. For any installation over 50 kilowatts or over 4 level 2 ports. It also includes that complimentary and comprehensive advisory service, that concierge person that can walk you through the process from, trying to find the right program fit to applying to actually getting this installed. And you're talking to one person the whole time. Community charging hubs, similar to normal public charging applications, though they also incorporate other electric mobility like ride sharing, as well as a pretty specific model of 1 or more DC fast chargers with 4 or more level 2 chargers, hoping to reach those that don't have access to charging in other places, whether they don't qualify for the multifamily portfolio or they have street parking. This is where community charging hubs come in. So there's also an income qualified and higher emissions rebate associated with community charging hubs. That looks like $8,800 or $2,200 a port for 4 level 2 ports and up to $40,000 for installs with a DC fast charger. There's a lot on this page. Work with an EV advisor to help sort through this, or feel free to ask questions here. The qualification is listed here as 50% or more of households at 80% of area, at or below 80% of area median income. So we qualify communities for community charging hubs, or located again in a higher emissions community where you can find the map on the website. So workplace EV supply infrastructure, really trying to reach both applications where businesses need charging for employee use or for customer use. So really broad offering. This is EV supply infrastructure again, 4 or more ports, 4 or more electrified parking spots, right? In our workplace portfolio, we offer optional charging equipment for a monthly fee through Excel, or you can bring your own and connect it to the EV supply infrastructure. And then workplace and fleet also have income qualified and high emissions rebate. This qualification is a little different, but also a little bit the same. Located in a higher emissions community, or demonstrate that the organization is a nonprofit or a public organization eligible to participate in one of our nonprofit efficiency programs. I would encourage anyone who's interested to apply, and again, start working with an EV advisor to find out if you think you'd qualify. So again, I might sound like a broken record a little bit, but the easiest way, if you live in Excel territory and you have a commercial and multifamily installation, head over to our website, start working with an EV advisor. They'll call you within a day or two to have a 30-minute sit down, just kind of figure out where you're at, and hopefully find the right program fit for you. There's a lot here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brandon. It is a lot of information, a lot of categories of support, but you know, it's a lot of new programs, so a lot of opportunity. So great. Well, I pulled back up just a review of our list of panelists with contact information. And I'm going to leave that up here while we jump into some questions. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so certainly know some of you may need to drop for another meeting, or maybe for a bite to eat. But if the questions go past the top of the hour, I hope we can stay on for a few minutes and get through those as much as possible. So Norma, can I ask you to kind of triage a few questions?
Yes, I have a few questions here, very interesting. Some of them have been already answered by our experts today. Thank you to our panelists. But there is something very important here that Rachel is asking, and it will be the slide decks available to the people attending these presentations, because we have these awesome presentations and people would like to have all that kind of information and links available to support their future operations. So will be this possible?
Yeah, we will share the presentations that you viewed today, as well as the recording of this call, in case anybody wants to take a look at it after the fact.
Perfect. And also we have here, Audrey, when do you anticipate there will be private sector interest to build EV charging stations similar to gas stations, like still very low inventory?
Any other panelists want to take a stab at that one?
I will take a stab at that, because I did also in the chat. It is happening. It is a more significant investment for any of those quote unquote gas stations than a liquid fueling pump is today. So there's a little bit of hesitation with that upfront CapEx, but a variety of different convenience store chains are embracing it. And so you can see, for example, locally, Come and Go has not only a lot of Tesla superchargers that they've deployed across properties, but they have also participated with Matt and the Colorado Energy Office on their DC Corridors program. And we are looking to partner with them on a couple of sites for the DC Plazas program as well. And I bring those programs up predominantly to also build on the fact that the Charge Ahead Colorado program, the XL Energy programs, what Tom and his team at PACE are offering. If you're paying attention to the chat, you will also see our colleague Diego with Northern Colorado Clean Cities there. A variety of different folks here that are at your service. and ultimately help to stack as many of these incentives as you can possibly take advantage of to make that upfront CapEx as feasible as possible. Diego also touched on the federal tax credit. That, of course, will exist for for-profit businesses, but I will throw a caveat, Diego, that technically expires at the end of this year. So if you'd like to see advanced tax incentives at the federal level, you might need to call your senators and or Congress people, but we'll see what happens with the infrastructure bill.
Great, thanks, Nigel.
Something related to that is, how is Colorado, the state of Colorado, enticing the private sector to proceed sooner rather than later to build more EV stations?
Well, to defer to you, Matt Mines. I think that the Charger Head was a strong program that's working on that. But if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think, Tom, that's right on. It's through kind of these partnership initiatives where we are providing significant funding for projects, but there is match required as well. And so it is that partnership either between the Energy Officer Rec and whatever entity it is. We have a wide variety of participants, from multifamily housing to nonprofits to private businesses, local and state agencies, state parks, et cetera, have all participated in the past, and the stations, they are not fully funded, and so there is that private investment. And then beyond that, we do have additional programs, kind of to RJ's point, what he alluded to, our corridor program, which is a very strong, public-private partnership, as well as our plazas program, that are looking to develop, kind of DC fast charging, plazas, or kind of akin to, banks of fast charging stations across the state, to enable that statewide travel.
Great. Norma, if I could just jump in, I see that Audrey DeBarros has a hand raised. Audrey, do you want to chime in?
Audrey is mute. Okay, she's all right.
Hi, everybody. There's my camera. Well, I just wanted to ask my question here that I've put in the chat around the private sector. It seems like in terms of mass adoption that we need private sector businesses to start building EV charging stations, just like we have gas stations. So where is the private sector? It seems like the public sector is leading out on this, which I understand why, due to, state goals around greenhouse gas emissions and whatnot. But the private sector really needs to be coming along to build EV charging stations so that, we can just go to a fast charging station and charge rather than worrying about it at our home.
Thanks, Audrey. I think that RJ tried to address some of that at the beginning of the Q&A session. If anybody wants to add anything to that, certainly jump in.
I'll only build on it quickly to piggyback on what Nigel touched on with his trip to South Dakota earlier. And so it's happening, but it mainly, Audrey, is a function of the arbitrage between the price of electricity down here and the price of liquid fuel up here. So it's really tight still. The price of liquid fuel, of fossil fuels, and I will say this through my own opinion, through my own lens, this doesn't reflect on anybody else on this panel or frankly on this call entirely. The price of liquid fuels is being artificially depressed. We do not price in the actual cost to our society, our biosphere, of what it costs to burn stuff. And so we have this gap. It's very difficult for the private sector to make arbitrage between the price of electricity and liquid fuels. And so Nigel experienced this on the road. Some of the prices at those chargers were higher than the the price of liquid fuel. And that's because many of those entities are trying to survive by reselling electricity only. But to your point, with gas stations and or convenience stores, if they become charging depots, they're never making money on reselling liquid fuel. They make their money selling soda, snacks, candy bars. And if you look at some of these new deployments, some of these new convenience stores, they're upgrading their food selection. They're giving a free Wi-Fi, place to hang out. It's a lot more comfortable. And they're adding back in sort of those light groceries that they used to have in the past. So they are becoming more of a destination charging location. And Matt, you might be able to touch on this as well through the Corridors program. Several of those locations did exactly that.
Yeah, Audrey, I
Thank
think
you. I
your
appreciate
question
that.
gets to an important point that, you know, it's depending on what the appropriate technology is, right? Where if you do have the ability to charge at home, you know, I think that's going to be the preferable option for the vast majority of people, you know, where you get home in the evening, plug in, charge overnight, super convenient, very cost effective, you know, a third the cost generally compared to gasoline in Colorado. Versus, you know, fast charging will probably be selective for, you know, certain subgroups like TNCs, you know, broader travel across, you know, corridors, or for people without access to at-home charging, you know, where it still makes a lot of sense and is convenient. But for the vast majority of vehicles, their lives are sitting idle. You know, their vehicle sits 95% of the time, and so a slower rate of charge is not a problem, you know, level 1 or level 2. You know, it's far more convenient than, you know, going out of your way to, you know, a gas station or even a fast charging station, to be fair. You know, so at home charging, you know, I think the intention is to have that be option 1 as it fulfills the majority of people's needs, and then you know, have these fast charging locations widely distributed to support, you know, every EV driver, and get people traveling in EVs.
Great. Hey, I'm gonna just jump in one more time, Norma, and ask you and anybody in the audience if we have any questions specific to Excel or specific for Brandon, and about the Excel programs while we have them on. Anybody from the participants, feel free to unmute yourself and jump in if you have a question for Brandon.
I'll only jump in to say I threw some links in there. They weren't perfect, but
They were great.
I think they get the point across.
Certainly.
And then broadly, again, PACE is here as a resource. Diego was on the line. He might still be here, but he threw a link into the chat for Northern Colorado Clean Cities. That is part of what Matt at the Colorado Energy Office helps to manage with a bunch of recharging advisors. They're completely non-salesy. I'm not a sales guy. People accuse me all the time of not selling enough stuff. We're all involved in education around this and helping you all to understand what the due diligence you need to even do on the front end and point you in the right direction. So the utility, through laws and regulations, now has this capability to offer all of these services. And the rest of us are just piggybacking on top of a lot of what they do, and vice versa. It's a real community effort, and I will honor everybody that participates.
Great, thank you, RJ. Norma, any more questions in the queue?
Yeah, I see the last one here. Is there any funding available to help to purchase commercial EV besides the RACQ money that Matt mentioned?
Jump in for that one. Unless Matt, you wanted to first.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Well, so Excel Energy offers vehicle rebates for residential customers that are income qualified, and impacted by higher emissions, which doesn't really apply to commercial EVs, but it does look like $3,000 for a used vehicle or $5,500 for a new vehicle. If that doesn't fit the bill, I just want to again mention the Fleet Electrification Advisory Program to find out really what your cost savings are going to be associated with electrifying your fleet, right? And maybe those cost savings can help to justify the purchase of that vehicle. Doesn't hurt to take a look, right?
And then I just add on to what Brandon said. It depends on the vehicle class. So if it's a light duty electric vehicle, there are not, kind of incentives beyond any of the tax credits. But if it's a medium or heavy duty electric vehicle that you're interested in, the RAC does have incentives outside of Charge Ahead Colorado through their program called Alt Fuels Colorado. And then, for transit vehicles, CDOT has incentives as well. And so kind of depends on the use case and the vehicle class, but there certainly could be resources. So yeah, happy to connect you with the appropriate person.
Thanks, Matt. Tyler, I see you've got your hand raised. Nice to see you.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of what RJ was saying, and with a community effort, I can attest that I've learned so much from each one of you around this table. I mean, there's been so many conversations, Brandon, you and I have had back in the spring, and Matt Mines, thank you so much, and the colleagues over at Boulder County. I think it's really helped Erie out specifically in setting our 25 by 2025 goal. Totally made it up, shooting for the moon here, and hopefully we get there. But it's been fun, and we couldn't have done it, and we couldn't be doing it progressively over the next couple of years without your guys' support. So Boulder County, thanks for setting this up, and really thank you for allowing me, myself personally and professionally, as well as the community at large, to kind of lean on your expertise. I think we're continuing to learn, and it's a fun journey as we continue to go along. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate that. Well, I'm going to put out a last call for questions before we let these panelists go. Thank them for their generous time to come and help us have this good conversation. And certainly I know any of them would be open to hearing from you directly with additional questions as they come up after the call. But has anybody got anything else they'd like to add now? Great. Well, Norma, thank you for helping us on question triage. We've got several of the other PACE advisors on this call today: Matt Hanna and Toby Russell, Erica Walters. I'm not sure who I'm not seeing. I'm not looking at the whole list, but we're all here to help businesses throughout the greater Boulder County area who have interest in pursuing EV charging for their commercial property or for their business location, multifamily housing. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And thanks everybody for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks all.